There's the coffee right there.
Yeah.
Delicious. All right, so ready to go?
Ready to go.
Ready to talk about photography?
Photography.
Ready to talk about RAW versus JPEG?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's what we're going to be doing today on Camera Academy. How's it going, everybody? This is Nick and Nikolai from Cometa Camera. And today on Camera Academy, we're going to be talking about RAW versus JPEG.
Yes. People get that easily confused.
I was like, yes, and.
And.
Before we get into the topic at hand today, we should just go over how you can get in touch with us and reach us and interact with us.
Social media.
Woo! Yeah, so on social media, you can get in touch with us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CometaCamera. Oh, yeah. On Twitter, we're just at Cometa. And we're on Instagram, too, aren't we?
We are at Cometa Camera.
And eventually, one of these days, we're going to start taking some pictures and putting them on there.
I know. It's time, man.
To be fair, though, neither one of us wouldn't consider ourselves Instagram models, so we're not going to be, taking pictures of our backsides in front of beautiful vistas or anything like that.
I haven't even touched my actual own Instagram in a couple months.
Oh, it's time to get on that.
It is. Life gets a little crazy. So,
I don't have enough 10-second Nikolai videos in my life.
You don't have enough videos of me raging in traffic?
Yeah. Those are always good, because when I'm here and you're stuck in traffic on the way to work, it's always nice to see that you're having a miserable time.
New York, man.
When I'm comfortable at my desk.
Like during that snowstorm we just had, the amount of people that I was raging at in my car, but...
It was sloppy out there.
Yeah.
So instead of getting into the weather, because this is kind of an evergreen type podcast, we're hoping that people will listen to this at any time of year, not just in the dead of winter. Well... I don't know how to respond to that.
Welcome to the Awkward Podcast with Nick and Nikolai.
Well, let's get to something that we know more about, because the weather is hard to predict and annoying to talk about. Let's talk about RAW versus JPEG, shall we?
Yes, let's do this.
So let's just start off with sort of defining what each of these file formats are. Now, most people out there are familiar with JPEGs because it's the most common image format in the world.
And also, most cameras come with that as your default.
Yes. Now, JPEGs can be read easily by any computer or mobile device. They have small file sizes, depending on the quality, of course. And they're print ready. So if you ever need to make prints, JPEGs are usually what you would be using.
Absolutely. So if you need to send that to a lab or something like that, you got to send a JPEG usually.
Right. I mean, you can print TIFFs, but they take up a lot more space.
Yeah, it's a big file.
All right. So JPEGs are technically what you would call a lossy format, meaning that there's some information, some data that's taken out of the file so that it can have a smaller file size, right? So in order to keep file sizes down, JPEGs are compressed by removing sort of the extraneous information, the same way like MP3s are compressed by removing sounds that are not audible to the human ear. They take out stuff that you can't really see in a JPEG, so that makes the file size smaller.
Yeah, so which kind of leads into what a RAW image is.
Right. A RAW image is going to be a completely unprocessed file. Like JPEGs are processed by your camera. All the colors and the white balance and the sharpness and all that stuff is set by your camera's processing engine. But with RAWs, those are completely unprocessed.
So the basic way I like to explain this to people is that a JPEG is basically a file that your camera edits in the camera body itself,
right,
and then produces the image for you in a smaller format, nice and compressed, smaller file size, and that's ready to go wherever you want to post it.
Right.
A RAW file is basically like an old film, like negative. It's like there's no editing done to it. It's just raw data, and basically it's a bigger file, but you have more to play with when you want to edit.
Right. Now, a RAW image file is considered a lossless format, meaning there's nothing taken away out of it. It's not compressed in any way, so it's not compressed, it has a much larger file size.
Yeah, all the information the camera captures is in that file.
Everything. Like if your image sensor captures any data, it's going to be stored in that file.
Yes.
Okay. And that, like you said before, gives you a lot more flexibility for editing for any post-production that you want to do.
But leads to a very large file size compared to a JPEG. A JPEG is pretty much almost usually half of what a RAW image is.
Right.
File size wise.
And then the other thing with RAWs that those images cannot be read by most devices. You need
No.
special software like Lightroom or Photoshop, and there's a lot of them out there,
Yeah.
of course. But in order to view or edit them, you're going to need some kind of software to do it. And you can't do it on your mobile device or anything. You need to do it on a computer. Although I knew you're going to...
I know. That
Technology's moving too fast
up.
for me to keep up with. There probably are some...
Yeah. So basically, I found out and I actually found this out from a customer because I never knew it, that you could actually edit some RAW files on iPhones now and iPads.
Ooh.
So
Well, with the processing power that you get from like a $800 phone, probably, yeah.
I mean, it's definitely slow, and I feel like my images don't quite come out the same way as if I was going to edit on my iMac or my my MacBook Pro. But it's nice to have in a pinch.
Okay. And just so we wrap up this little segment here, that most cameras, like you said before, will shoot JPEGs by default, but most cameras these days, including premium point-and-shoots, will be able to shoot RAWs.
Yes.
There's going to be a few cameras on the cheap end that can't do it, but most of them that you spend like $400 or $500 on, and of course everything above that, you will be able to shoot RAWs. All right, so let's go over some pros and cons for each file format. Let's start with JPEG because everyone knows JPEGs. The pros, number one, they're easy. There's no processing required at all, and most cameras do a really good job of processing images, including corrections for like lens distortion and things like that.
Yeah, and white balance corrections and stuff like that too.
And the image processing engines, like the actual processor and the sort of software that or the firmware really that they include on your camera, is kind of a selling point these days because some cameras will have different processing features than others. Like you recommend Fujifilm for people who like to shoot JPEG because they have specific color profiles and processing that makes their pictures come out, better than other manufacturers.
Yeah, and I mean, like with the Fujifilm, I pretty much exclusively shoot my Fujifilms in JPEG just because they come out so good. Like, there's no need for me to even shoot it in RAW. Like the way it processes I can't even explain it. It just comes out like sharp. Colors are awesome, and most cameras, like you just said, have like presets built into them. So if you wanted to get something like you wanted to shoot like a landscape, and you wanted like you really wanted the greens to pop, like in the grass, and you wanted the blue in the sky to pop. You put that on, and it saturates it more.
Right.
If you were to shoot that I'm getting a little ahead of myself again, with RAW, all that stuff wouldn't be applied. It would basically be just like almost like a flatter file, and you're meant to edit it later, not just have it ready to go as soon as you shoot it.
Right. So the idea is basically that with JPEGs, you don't have to do any editing. You should be able to rely on your camera's processing to give you a ready-to-go, produced, already, perfect file.
Quick and ready to go.
Sometimes you won't be satisfied, and you might want to edit it afterwards. You don't get to have as much play.
But you can edit, yeah.
But yeah, you can edit it. So, ease of use is really the primary reason for using JPEGs.
Yep.
Another pro of JPEGs are that, like we said before, they're compatible with everything. So whether you're using a PC or a Mac or an iPhone or whatever it is that you want to view or edit your pictures on, you'll be able to do so with a JPEG.
Yep, so basically if you wanted to shoot some shots with your camera on vacation and you got a really cool shot that you want to upload to like Facebook or something right away, you can just use, the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth connectivity, put it right on your phone and post it right away. You don't have to do any editing or anything.
Right. And again, if you're on vacation and you want to print out some pictures and you want to bring your stuff to, let's say, a drugstore like CVS or whatever, and
or you can have an Instax printer or something like that.
You're going to need to provide JPEGs.
Yep.
If you provide someone with a bunch of RAW files, they're going to not know what to do with them. Or they might just not be able to do anything with them. Another great pro is that JPEGs are smaller. So images can be transferred quickly from camera to phone or camera to computer. You can email pictures without having to go over like file size limits, because usually JPEGs are under 10 megs or so, depending on the resolution.
You can also shoot more pictures.
Yep, so you won't fill up your memory card so fast.
Yep.
And then you can, like you said, shoot more. You'll have more space, and you'll have a lot more pictures to go with, especially if you like to shoot fast.
Yep, and if you're like an event photographer, you're outside and you have ample light, and you can rapid fire that, make sure you get a good shot of like a moving subject. and it's not going to take up that much space, and you won't have to go crazy editing it and going through them later.
Right. And that kind of dovetails into the other one more pro that I have for JPEGs is that your camera will generally be able to shoot faster.
Yes.
So because JPEGs are smaller in size, you can shoot more images and you can shoot at faster burst rates because your camera's buffer won't fill up as fast, and you won't have as much time between bursts. Like sometimes if you shoot a burst of photos, then your camera will stop for a few seconds and not allow you to do anything while it waits to process those images and save them to your memory card. If you're shooting JPEGs, you don't have to wait that long, if at all. If you're shooting RAWs, you're going to have to wait a lot longer, generally speaking. So, all right, so what about some cons for JPEGs? Number one, the most obvious one.
Yeah, you can't really edit them too much.
Right. You can't really do much with underexposed or overexposed areas for the most part. And that's, for me, when I shoot JPEGs, that's usually my biggest problem, is that if I'm shooting pictures and it's kind of contrasty, you know, it's in bright light or something like that, and I take a picture and I want it, you know, to edit a certain part of it, my highlights are just going to be blown out if I want to bring up something else. So then I have to go through and like manually do things with a dodge tool or a burn tool. And that's kind of a pain. It's nicer when you can just do the whole image.
Yeah, there's a lot less information in a JPEG to play with. There is some there, but you're not going to have a lot of play with it like you would a RAW image.
Right.
Which we'll get into later.
And underexposed areas, of course, won't give you much detail.
No.
So, and this is all because JPEGs are, of course, a lossy type format.
Yes.
Right? So you lose detail, especially in those dark and bright areas, and you don't have as much what's called dynamic range. And if you can just explain what dynamic range is, because it's a term that people hear about, but they don't really understand what it means.
Let's see, how do I explain this? It's kind of like has something to do with like bit depth, and that's another little one that's a little complicated.
Well, just in terms of light and dark, if you have really good dynamic range, you have detail in the bright
shadows,
areas.
You have details in the shadows, and you have details in the highlights, meaning that nothing in the image is a solid white or a solid black.
Right. There will always be some detail in those areas. Now, if you have poor dynamic range, or less of a range than you do with a
see, it's like it's a really hard thing to just explain.
I'm just saying that
versus when you see it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to explain on a podcast.
All right, but basically, with good dynamic range, you have more better shadows and better bright areas.
You have more detail in every aspect of the picture.
Yep. Well, let's just move on from that then, since it's we're kind of tripping over it a little bit.
It's something you have to see. It's like it's a visual thing you need to see.
Right. One thing that about JPEGs that really gets to me is the fact that if you change them, you deal with what's called destructive editing. Now, destructive editing means that if you edit a picture and you don't save a copy of the original, that picture is going to be changed forever. You can't go back. You cannot go back and change it. So if you have a picture and you change the saturation and make it more colorful, and you save that file, and then you want to go back and change it back, you can, but it's going to look worse. And every time you save a JPEG, it's going to look worse because it keeps compressing and it keeps degrading.
Yeah. So if you save a JPEG and you try and edit that saved JPEG, it's going to start looking nasty.
Yeah. Even if you don't make any changes to it, like if you literally take a JPEG and just like crop the entire thing and then just resave it, if you keep resaving it over and over again, the compression is going to actually make it look worse.
Yeah.
So you have a limited amount of saves that you can do before the image starts looking like garbage.
Yeah. The only counter to that would be to be editing in Lightroom software, because that's non-destructive editing on anything, because basically all your edits that you do in Lightroom is basically saved in a separate file that it applies when you save it, if that makes sense.
It does, but doesn't that only apply to RAW?
No, it applies to JPEGs too.
With Lightroom, is that right?
Yes.
Huh. I did not know that.
Basically, any edit you make, you're not actually editing the picture in Lightroom. It's basically giving you have the file, and then basically any edit you make on that picture is saved as a separate file, but it's giving you a preview of what it's going to look with your edits.
Okay.
Then when you want to, say, export it, you have to click export and you save it as the JPEG.
Now
and
this is
a separate file.
This is a process that I understand is how you would edit any RAW image in any program.
Absolutely, yes.
But I didn't know that it applied to JPEGs with that. So I guess what we're saying here is that Lightroom is a good image editor.
Yes.
But
you get it with Photoshop from Adobe for $10 a month. It's a no-brainer if you're really into photography. You get 2 great programs for $10 a month.
There's some free ones out there too. I know there's one I think it's called Darktable. Is that the one?
No idea.
There are a few free ones out there that are pretty decent, but if you're used to sort of the Adobe workflow and you're used to the tools that they provide,
I'm hooked for life.
You can either use Photoshop and use the Camera Raw plugin, or you can use Lightroom, which is gives you a better workflow.
If you edited your photos JPEGs in Bridge, that would be destructive editing.
Well, Bridge, do they even have that anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't even know. I mean, that's basically for like batch editing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can do batch editing with Lightroom too, but I guess they're keeping Bridge around just because a lot of people are comfortable with that. It took me like almost 2 years to start using Lightroom because I was so comfortable with the way Bridge was. And Lightroom just seemed really complicated to me. But then once I actually sat down for a couple hours and learned it, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see the benefit of this.
And not to turn this into a Lightroom commercial, but we should also say that the most recent version has been really improved. They have like a cloud version and they have a desktop version.
Yeah.
They're basically the same, and you pay the same amount of money for them. But I think they just work a little bit differently. The main thing that they added in the most recent versions is better RAW support, and you can read RAW files and process them a lot faster now.
Yeah, so basically, like, again, when you say you couldn't edit RAW on your phone, with Lightroom mobile, you're basically linking up to, I guess, a computer that has all your files saved on it in the cloud, so you can edit it on your phone, because the file's there, it's not really on your phone.
Cool.
I haven't used the mobile version yet. I'm kind of stuck with the classic, because that's just the way I like to edit.
Yeah.
But it's cool to have the option.
So what we're saying is, if you're into photography, you might want to pony up the $10 a month to get Lightroom.
Yeah, it's really worth it.
Yeah.
Once you know it, you're golden.
Okay, so rather than continue on with our advertising,
yes,
which we're not getting paid for,
that's fine.
Let's talk about some pros and cons for RAW.
All right. Well, first pro is pretty easy. It's got a lot of information for you to edit with.
Right. It gives you the complete image data. Everything that comes off your sensor goes into this one file.
So basically, instead of, if you're taking a picture of something and you just don't quite know how you want it to look, let's say like you're taking a picture of like a sunset and you want it to be like, you don't know if you want to kind of cool it down, make it look like really like dramatic, or if you want to make it really warm and give it that like beach, like summery kind of feel. Mm-hmm. You can edit that image later in, like, again, Photoshop or
Lightroom,
an editing program, and you can actually play with the colors as opposed to not really being able to play with them on a JPEG.
Right. So, I mean, overall, what a RAW gives you is a lot more flexibility with editing, and that goes from everything from your lights, your darks, your color, your white balance.
You can lift your shadows. You can dull down your highlights.
Exposure for me is the biggest advantage, because sometimes you'll be shooting things and you know the exposure is not going to be right, but that moment has already passed by. You can't fix it perfectly with a JPEG, but you can with a RAW.
And my other big thing with RAW is that you can adjust your white balance.
Yeah.
You can change your white balance.
Yes.
On file.
Yeah, so let's say you're in a room like we're sitting in now, which is just fluorescent lights, and you take that picture back, and normally shooting in JPEG, it would look green.
Yep.
Or maybe you chose a white balance setting on your camera and you picked the wrong one.
Yep.
Or the auto white balance on your camera didn't work out
messed up
perfect
sometimes.
Yep. So with a RAW file, you can really make lots of changes to that.
It's a beautiful thing.
So what else do we have? You got the ability to do manual changes for noise reduction and sharpening, which are things that are normally applied in camera when you're shooting JPEGs, but when you shoot with a RAW file, you can change these things manually, and you can really do a better job with noise reduction and with sharpening depending on your tastes.
Yep. You can adjust your hues, you can adjust your saturation, you can adjust your luminance.
Ooh.
You can adjust clarity, you can adjust vibrance. There's so many things you can change on a RAW file.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's going to take quite some time to get used to all the different options that you have available to you.
I still don't know all of them.
And you can create presets for yourself. You can have if you're trying to come up with a workflow, like if you shoot a bunch of pictures and you want them all to look the same, you can set like a macro and have that apply to a huge batch of pictures so they all look identical, which I guess you could do with the JPEG as well, but with RAW, they're all going to have exactly the same image data, and they're all going to look pretty much the same.
Yeah, you can use also, big thing I do is secondary software. You have a lot of play with being able to put like filters and effects on top of your pictures with that.
So plugins that would work with Lightroom?
Like I use one called On One Software, and they basically made a specific program specifically to edit RAW images, and there's just so much you can do to your pictures with there. You can add like...
Hang on.
I told you you needed water.
I was thinking of something to say, and I kind of inhaled my coffee. And I was like, oh.
But yeah, you can stack
Continue.
you can stack filters on top of them, almost like let's compare this to like almost like Instagram when you can like they give you like the option to put filters and do a little bit of editing on there. Just imagine that, but being able to put a lot more detail on things.
Yes, and having your results be suitable for something other than Instagram.
Yeah, like 12 by 12 print.
Yeah, you would actually
like
have
that.
Something that would be suitable to print, or something that you could actually I don't know, if you were a serious photographer, something you could make money on.
Yep.
They've got lots of crazy I don't want to say crazy because that's just my perspective, but they've got some really interesting third-party software that does lots of stuff that you wouldn't even think of.
Yeah.
And especially portraits, there's software out there that'll just take out every blemish, and all you got to do is basically click the plugin, and it'll smooth out your skin, and it'll make everything perfect.
Yeah.
Although you may not want that look, but if you're shooting for like glamour magazines, you would.
Yeah, and it makes it really easy. I've actually tried using some of those softwares before, and for some reason, it just doesn't look good to me when I do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
maybe just because I don't like
taste.
that look. Yeah, maybe it's just because I don't like the look, but like I feel like it softens your eyes up, even though it says it doesn't soften the eyes. But I'm a pixel peeper, so.
But the point is that stuff is out there,
yeah.
And there's again just lots more flexibility available to you when you shoot in a RAW format.
Yeah, another benefit.
Tough day today.
Another benefit of RAW is if you need a safety shot.
Oh yeah.
For like an important event or something like that, like a wedding or like Sweet 16 or like a first birthday party or something like that, and you don't want to like miss a moment on a shot. You can shoot in RAW and JPEG at the same time on most cameras.
I was going to get into this later, but if you want to hit it now, by all means.
Might as well hit it now. You can shoot in RAW and JPEG at the same time. So let's say you got the shot in your JPEG, and you got the shot. Oops.
Whoa! Watch that, Mike.
You got the shot. It's like, and it comes out perfect. So you can just use the JPEG for that.
Right.
But let's say you got that shot, and then Uncle Frank's decided to use his camera too, and you can see the flash or something in there, or someone got in the way. You can go into that RAW file and re-edit the things that you need to edit.
Yep. And speaking of editing, RAW is always non-destructive. So you will always be able to make changes to that original RAW file, and then of course when you're done making the changes, you export it as a JPEG or as a TIFF or whatever file format you want, but RAWs are infinitely editable.
Yeah.
So you're never going to make changes and then not be able to go back.
Again, if you're used to film, think of it as your negative. It's
right.
It's a digital negative, which is actually a format you can change your RAW files into in a lot of programs.
Yep. Oh yeah, digital negative, that's another Adobe thing, right?
Yeah.
So digital negative is a file format, a RAW file format that is basically, they're trying to standardize things.
Yeah, so it can basically be read by any computer and almost any program.
Right, and that's one of the things I was going to get into with cons, and we can talk about some cons of RAW files. One of them is that until the digital negative was introduced, there really was no standard.
Yeah,
and there still really
universal.
isn't.
No.
I mean, every camera manufacturer has their own version of RAW, and they all have different file extensions, so it's tough to keep them all straight in your mind. Like Canon has
CR2,
Nikon is NEF, Sony is ARW. I don't know what Fuji and Panasonic do, but
Fuji is DNG. I can't remember because I really don't shoot RAW.
Well,
that
that's
much
the
in my
digital
Fuji.
negative one. So maybe they.
Oh yeah,
use
yeah,
that.
DNG. No. That's some. Yeah, I was just thinking. Never mind. That's digital negative.
But anyway, the point there is that they all have these different formats, and they're all read differently by different software. There's really no standardization. So when you have software like Lightroom, they have to like reverse
Update.
engineer, and they have to update, and they have
Yeah.
to figure out all the different nuances to all these different RAW formats so that you can work with them correctly.
Yeah. Luckily, if you're a Mac user, you'll get like an update on your computer saying like you randomly get those updates, and you feel like you get them like every week. That's because if a new camera comes out,
Yeah.
Mac, and I'm Mac fanboying here, I guess, a little bit. They'll have an update with like the new RAW format, so your computer can read them.
Now, does Mac still have Aperture, that program?
I don't know. I never used it.
Okay. I think that's been basically replaced by Lightroom. I don't know if Mac is still supporting it.
Yeah,
If Apple is still supporting it.
I can't confirm or deny.
Okay. Another con is going to be that the file sizes are
Huge.
much bigger than JPEGs.
Yes.
And then if you're shooting with one of these crazy high-resolution cameras like a Sony a7R III, and you're using a 42-megapixel picture, those file sizes are going to be outlandish.
And you haven't updated your computer since 2010.
or before.
Your computer's probably not going to be able to handle trying to edit that picture.
Yeah, like I said, Lightroom has been updated to work better and faster, but if you have a really old computer, you're going to probably need to update it before you can start processing RAWs.
Yep.
Which is why those images are not processed in camera, because you need much more processing power, and that's why you do it on your desktop, or at the very least, a pretty powerful tablet or mobile device.
Yep.
And then your memory cards will fill up faster, of course, so you're going to need to have a bigger memory card, and then you can't shoot as fast or as long.
Your
because
buffer's going to fill up faster.
So those are some cons, and then the one other that sort of affects me and every other photographer I know is that everyone wants to edit their picture. Well, you have to edit it if you shoot it only in RAW, and it always takes time before you actually get to see those pictures.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with your family photographer, so to speak, and they'll be like, "When am I going to get to see the pictures from the party?" Oh, it might take weeks.
Yeah.
It might take till the next birthday
It's like,
before you
if
actually
you want
see
them to
them.
look really good, just give me a little time, please.
Yeah, but it always ends up being more time than you really are planning for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it takes time to edit stuff unless you just do like batch files, and then if you're doing that, then you're not really taking full advantage of the file format, and you might as well just shoot in JPEG.
Yeah. Another con that I'm not sure if anyone else can associate with me, it might just be a me thing.
Okay.
But I feel like some other people can. I find myself if I'm shooting an event or something, and I know I have to shoot RAW, I kind of consciously try and shoot less, just because I know the file I'm not going to have as much room to play with. It's going to take my camera longer to process it. It's going to take up more hard drive space when I put it on my computer. It's going to take my computer longer to load them. So
Well, I mean, it basically all means it's just more of a hassle. you know?
you're basically going to have to put in more work. You're going to take up more space. And if you shoot a lot and you're shooting RAW all the time, it's going to cost you a little money to start getting like external hard drives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So if you have to put it on an external hard drive, then if you want to see your images, you got to take your hard drive out. You got to put it onto your computer. So it's just kind of like one of those things where it's like, oh God, I don't want to do it, but I'm gonna do it.
Yep.
Kind of deals.
I've got a friend who's got a RAID set up.
Yeah.
That he can actually back up all his RAW files from his crazy resolution camera.
Backup. Yep, that's the big thing.
Yep, so you got to spend more for all of those memory cards, hard drives, and all that. But if you're a professional in any sense, then you're probably going to end up doing that. And for good reason. Like we mentioned, there's plenty of pros for shooting in RAW.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But you're just going to have to be cognizant of those negatives that go along with it. So let's just talk about when we would actually, as a user, when are the best times to use JPEG and or RAW. So I would say the best times to use JPEG is when you're shooting a lot of images. So you want to have, if you're shooting like really fast or you're shooting sports, things like that, and you want to get lots of burst shots done, then you would probably want to shoot in JPEG because your camera will shoot faster. You'll be able to get more bursts. You won't have to wait as long between bursts, and you won't fill up as much space in your memory card.
Yeah. So basically, if you're shooting events where things are going on fast,
or any time where you want to like really capture that perfect moment.
I would shoot JPEG.
Yeah.
So now going into RAW.
Oh, hang on a second.
Oh, you got some more things?
Yeah, I got a whole bunch of them.
Okay, all right, go for it.
Well, most people out there are going to be shooting JPEG.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that people understand that we're not dumping on JPEGs here.
Oh no, like I said, I shoot JPEGs all the time.
So casual snapshots, if you're shooting family, doing barbecues,
just hanging out,
whatever, you're not going to need RAW files because
Get
really
them selfies in with your best friend at their birthday party.
Yeah. When you want to look back on those memories, they don't need to be art.
Yeah.
It just needs to be a picture.
I mean, I have some of my favorite pictures are like back from the film days where like, disposable cameras where like the image just comes out blurry and has like no detail, but it triggers the memory.
Right. What really matters is that you captured the moment.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look like it belongs in a museum.
And when in doubt, just put it in black and white.
You can do that. Everyone, ooh, look at black and white. It looks so classy.
I'm serious. Try it. If you feel like a picture like looks like crap and the colors are all off and blah blah blah, just throw it in black and white. Take a look at it and see what it looks like.
Good
Guarantee
point.
you'll save it.
I like it. Another
Pro
good
tip.
time is when you want to share your pictures right away. So if you want to get your pictures out on social media or if you just want to send them to somebody right away, an example from my point of view, last year the kids at school were doing a Halloween parade and my neighbor didn't bring her camera. So she said, can you take some pictures and send them to me? And before the parade was over, she already had all the pictures of her daughter because I was able to put them on my phone and text them to her right away.
Bada bing, bada boom.
One of the many benefits of JPEGs.
Yeah.
And if you want to do that, or if you want to put your stuff on Instagram right away, or whatever, JPEG is the way to go. You can get it done much more quickly, and of course, you won't have to wait until you go back home and sit at your desktop and edit for a week.
Yeah. Sometimes you just don't have the time, or you just don't want to do that.
Yep. Another good reason to use JPEG is if you want to use some of those in-camera color profiles or effects, things like that. Like
it applies into it right away.
There are those cool effects where you can have like just one color in the entire frame show up. So if you only want the red to show up on like a rose or a bouquet or something, I know you think they're cheesy.
No. I'm just
but
saying,
some people like them.
No. I like them. I'm just.
Oh, okay.
It was just reminding me of like one of my professors who was just like hated that style.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, a lot of people will think they're cheesy, but I know a lot of people who appreciate that.
I enjoy
it. It looks cool.
I've done a few shots like that.
So if you wanted to use any of those, they've got like those miniature modes, or they've got different sepia tones and things like that. Lots of effects that you can do in camera, and there more and more of those are available with every passing model. That will be available in JPEG, of course. Because it's being processed in camera. So if you want to use any of those color modes or art filters or whatever the hell they call them, JPEG is obviously the way to go.
So just a note on that. If you do have your camera set in one of those modes and you shoot in RAW, the RAW image is not, when you go into your computer, it's not going to look like the image you have on your camera sometimes.
Right. You won't have a sepia toned RAW.
No, it'll just be the regular color picture profile.
Right. Perhaps you don't feel like using editing software like Lightroom. You don't want to spend the $10. It's $120 a year, Nick. It's not chicken feed.
I know.
Although chicken feed costs more than $120, I hate to tell you.
Mr. Chicken Farmer.
Yeah. If you don't want to do that and you just want to edit your pictures for free, or if you don't want to be bothered with editing at all, shoot in JPEG.
You don't need to
have
edit
to
all the time.
Nope. And then, like, your time is more important. That is a good reason to shoot in JPEG. If you just don't have time to sit down and edit, or you just don't want to, or it's not really that important to you, then fine. By all means, shoot in JPEG. We won't judge you for it.
Yep.
It's totally fine. It's really pictures, as with any kind of art, it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely.
All right, so you wanted to talk about some times you would shoot with RAW. Knock yourself out, Nikolai.
All right. So with RAW, the way I mainly shoot with RAW is if, again, I need to capture a moment, I need to be absolutely sure that I get the look I want.
So if you're shooting portraits or landscapes or anything like in a studio.
Yeah. Basically, and I was going to lead into this, if you have control over your subject and you have time to compose, you have time to, adjust your settings properly, why wouldn't you shoot in RAW?
Yeah.
It just gives you more play, and it gives you more information to do edits for to make sure you get the look the way you want it.
And if you have all that control, you don't have to take as many shots.
Exactly.
You can get it right the first time, and then you can just edit to your heart's content.
So say like
if you want.
Again, like if you want to take a picture of a landscape and you're just not sure what color tone you want to make it, instead of shooting one in each color tone on a JPEG, like making a cool Kelvin, making it a warm Kelvin, using the presets, just playing with the tungsten versus the incandescent, playing with the sunset, playing with the shade, cloudy.
Yeah.
You can just take one picture and just play with the slider later in editing software.
Yeah. There's so much you can do.
Yeah.
It's really quite amazing the way you can shift what looks like a pretty standard picture and what you can do with it.
So again, if you're in like a studio environment, you have control over your subject. You have like your camera on a tripod getting ready to take a landscape or something like that.
Yeah.
Shoot in RAW.
Now, it could also be said that if you don't have control of your environment, RAW could also be good, because if you're doing something like
True.
street photography, or you're a photojournalist and you don't have time to sit there and play with your exposure settings and get everything perfect, you might want to shoot in RAW, because that way you can go back and, as we say at the end of the show, fix it in post.
Yeah. So basically, that's another good point. If you don't have time to change, you don't have time to shoot manually, you're not shooting in manual mode, and you just want to have your camera in auto because you want to capture moments.
Right.
You can have your camera in RAW, and that way, the camera does all the work as far as exposure-wise that you don't have to think about now, so you're rapid firing it. You can just go back later and then change the look of the picture way you want it to be.
Right. Some other settings that you might want to use RAW, high contrast scenes. So if you've got really bright lighting, like really bright sunlight, you're going to end up normally with really bright brights and really dark darks,
yep.
And you're going to have some unappealing contrast in there. If you want to be able to edit those brights and darks, best to shoot in RAW, so that way you're able to have more control over them later on.
Yeah.
How about white balance? Like we mentioned before, if you are aware of the light that's coming into your scene, you may want to shoot in RAW so that you have more control over it. So, like you said, if you're in this office right now with fluorescent lights, shoot it in RAW so that you can apply a nice incandescent tone to it later on. And then I would say, if you enjoy the process of making your images all that they can possibly be, you really appreciate the art of post-processing, then by all means shoot in RAW, because that's, again, how you will have the most control and how you'll be able to sort of make them into a piece of art that you can be proud of. A lot of the times when you just rely on the camera and the JPEG comes out and you can't do much with it, you end up being disappointed.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, I wish I could have changed, I wish this looked this way or this looked that way. It's like...
You'll have a lot more ability to do that and meet your own lofty expectations when you're shooting with RAW.
And, editing for a lot of people, including me, sometimes is therapeutic. You wake up in the morning, you have your robe on, you go make yourself a cup of coffee.
It can be sometimes
sit down with Spotify.
The most fun part of photography is taking that image, which normally may have not been anything special, and making something special out of it.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It's a different, it's not what some snobby photographers would say is really the essence of photography. For them, it's looking through the viewfinder and getting that image and nailing it from the camera. But for a lot of other people, doing that post-processing work is kind of like painting. It's something that they do that really gives that image their own personal feel and aesthetic.
And that's actually another good point of shooting in RAW. If you're the type of person that, let's say you're trying to be a pro or a semi-pro, or if it's just you enjoy the process of doing the photographing, but you don't want to do the editing and you're going to send it off to someone else to do it, better to give them a RAW image than a JPEG to play with.
Sure. All right, so those are all the pros and cons and ideas of when to use RAW versus JPEG and all that. I just want to add a couple other caveats here at the end of the podcast. We just want to say that do not use RAW as a crutch. We don't want you to shoot in RAW just because it makes it easier, and you won't evolve as a photographer if you just shoot in RAW because, as we say at the end of this podcast again, because it's a joke, you're going to fix it in post. That's laziness that we don't really appreciate as artists.
Like, it's how do I explain this? If you get your shot the way you want to in the first snap and you don't have to apply anything to it, and you're just like, man, I captured this the way I wanted to. There's just something so satisfying about that.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you can get the shot in JPEG, or even if you shoot it in RAW, if you shoot it and you get it the way you want to, you get it composed right, you don't have to do any cropping, you don't have to do any adjustments. It's really rewarding to get that done like that.
Well, we should say that shooting in JPEG can also help because if you don't
have the crutch.
You
can't edit it.
Exactly. So it can help you be a better photographer. You'll be more cognizant of exposure and all the different elements that go into creating
You'll think about it more before you actually press the button.
Yeah.
Press the shutter.
So maybe shooting with the idea that you're going to have a JPEG as your end product, but maybe just have that RAW there as a backup.
Yeah.
You can do that.
It's a good challenge. I do it to myself sometimes too. I'll just shoot specifically in JPEG. That way I can't, again, like you said, I don't have that safety net. I can't. Right. It's a good way to train yourself to shoot properly.
Mm-hmm. And then in the end, the ideal situation is that you do both. You shoot properly and you shoot in RAW so that you don't have to use that as your crutch.
An actual fun challenge I do to myself sometimes is I will try and limit myself as far as how many pictures I can take in a day. Mm-hmm. So I pretend I have like a roll of film or like a couple rolls of film on me. So I limit myself to only being able to take like 100 shots. And I turn my LCD off so I can't see the picture before I take it. I mean, after I take it.
Maybe we could just dig up one of those 128 megabyte cards and put that in your camera.
I have some old cards where that's why a lot of times I'll buy 8 gigabyte cards.
Yeah, and it's basically, all right, I've got 24 exposures to work with here, and that's all I've got.
But it's fun, and that's why I think that's why a lot of people do, like, film is actually making a little bit of a comeback.
Yeah.
Because people are finding that it's a fun hobby. It's fun to do. It's a challenge.
Yeah, and it forces you to learn more about the actual camera so that you don't just start firing away and leaning on the different automatic modes that your camera provides.
Yeah.
While we love digital and it provides us so many different options and flexibility with our imagery, you're right. Going back to film can be quite a challenge and can be, as you mentioned before, a little bit therapeutic.
Yeah, because I remember back in the day, like when I was using, like when I was a kid and I was just using like throwaway cameras, the, automatic, what do you call them, disposable cameras.
Yeah.
Or I had, my mom got me a little cheap 35 millimeter point and shoot. I remember when I finished that roll, I used to get so excited to bring that to like get developed and see what see what I get back. Mm-hmm. There's a level of excitement to that. So if you've never experienced that in the digital age, try turning your LCD off on your camera, limit yourself to shooting 30 images, and you're not allowed to take a look at those pictures until you bring them back to your laptop or your computer.
Wow. I don't know if I can do that.
Try it.
My kids move too fast.
Try it. Just try it.
And then one last thing is that we've mentioned many times that you can shoot in both JPEG and RAW. We should tell you that, yes, that's an option. You don't have to shoot just JPEG or just RAW. Almost every camera will give you the option to do both. So you can shoot JPEGs and then have RAW as your backup, or you can shoot RAWs and then have JPEGs also for social media purposes. Mm-hmm. Just keep in mind that because you're going to be saving two things instead of one thing,
it will slow down the camera.
It'll slow things down.
And it will fill up your cards faster. If you have a kind of higher end digital SLR or mirrorless camera, sometimes they'll come with 2 memory card slots.
Ooh, that's nice.
And you can set up one of them memory cards to record only RAW and the other one to record JPEG.
Yep. So that'll give you the best of both worlds, and it won't slow things down too much.
I mean, it'll still slow it down because it's saving to 2 separate memory cards.
Yeah. Just make sure if you're shooting RAW, you get like the fastest memory card that your camera will accept. That's also important because write speed is part of the whole equation there.
Yep.
All right, Nick, is there anything else that we should cover here in this podcast?
No, I think we covered quite a lot with this one.
Yeah, I think so. So hopefully this was educational and helpful here in Camera Academy. Again, if you want to get in touch with us on social media, we're there on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and if you want to write to us or anything and give us some suggestions for the show, or if you have any questions, social@cometa.com is where you can write to us.
Yeah, because off topic, has anyone ever heard of Vero yet? Have you been updated?
I don't know anything about it except that they had a million user type limit, and then you would have to start paying for it. Yeah. So I don't think it's gonna really.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna last,
successful.
But it seemed like it was getting quite a push. I made an account, but like I went on it, and there were kind of, I guess they weren't ready to experience like the amount of traffic they were getting, so it was kind of like.
Yeah. Does this have anything to do with MySpace?
No.
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 You want to be in my top 8 spaces?
Oh
top
my
8
God.
friends?
I deleted
can post
my
images
I
on,
deleted my MySpace.
I don't remember what happened to it. Mine might still exist, but
Yeah.
if you go back on it, it's probably just a bunch of pictures of me living in my basement apartment,
No, I know
being all broke
I know
and
they
stuff.
updated. It's mainly evolved around music and media now. So.
Oh. Well, I don't know.
Which is what its original purpose was supposed to be, but then it turned into like a big social media platform. But then Facebook came and just knocked it out.
Poor Tom.
Yeah,
Remember Tom?
I remember Tom.
He's a good dude.
He's my first friend.
Yeah, me too.
I think he was everyone's first friend.
Well, way to make me feel like I'm not really special. Nikolai's giving a big thumbs up. Is that what he was doing?
I'm doing the Tom pose.
Oh, I thought he was just kind of like looking back from his desk or something like
It
that.
shows how much you know about your friend Tom.
Well, he didn't keep in touch with me, so what do you want? All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to Camera Academy, and hope you know a lot more about RAW and JPEG, and go out there and shoot to your heart's content in whatever file format you want. But just make sure that you are happy with it, and it works for you. That's what's really important, is that whatever file you choose, it works for you.
Play with both.
Yep.
And figure out your shooting style.
And don't
That's
forget
it.
to buy Adobe Lightroom, only $9.99 per month.
And it comes with Photoshop.
Yeah, does it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
They have a photography package that comes with Lightroom.
I can't believe her.
No, it comes with Lightroom Classic
Yeah.
and Photoshop
Oh, fabulous.
for $9.99 a month.
Wow. Same price as the WWE network.
Yes, it is.
All right, everybody. Have a good time. Enjoy your photography. And until next time, we'll fix it in post.
Unless it's a JPEG.